My name is John Carden. I was in the United States Marine Corps, and I got out as a staff sergeant.
And tell us about, just set the scene if you would, around the time that you went into the military. What prompted you to enlist?
Well, I went in 1999, and what prompted me to enlist was I didn't have any other choice. It was that or go to work, and they talked a good game, and I thought I'd give it a try. And it was only 5 years, so I went in and I did that. And then I got out after the first enlistment.
Did you see combat?
I did. Right after 9/11, our unit was actually preparing to deploy anyway. And so right after 9/11, we actually went over and went into Afghanistan. And we were there my deployment was a total of 8 months. And then we came back and then we stayed in the rear for however long it was, a year-ish. And then we actually went over into Kuwait and then did the push into Iraq. And I guess that was 2003.
So you were recruited basically right out of high school?
Oh yes, yeah. I signed the initial contract, I was still in high school.
So what was that like right after high school? I guess you're 18 years old, to be part of that boot camp experience. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Boot camp was, it's like the stories. It's like the stories where their job was to make your life miserable, and your job was just to let them. And so, if you look at it that way, it's just them doing their job and you doing their job, and you just take each day one at a time until it's done. And it was just. It's like a summer camp, you do a little of this one day, you do a little of that the next day, you run around, that's about it. It wasn't a big deal.
What was the preparation like, I guess, between boot camp and when you ended up being deployed? What was the preparation like for active duty?
Well, I was a helicopter mechanic, so after boot camp I had to go to 2 different schools, and I went to that first school and then the second school, and then I finally I got to my unit, my squadron, and preparing for the deployment. The way the Marine Corps works is you're working it's pretty much a 24-month rotation. So out of every 2 years, you spend 6 months deployed. And so the 6 months prior to that 6-month deployment, you're actually what they call chopped over. And so they bring all these different units together into one unit that's going to deploy for that 6-month deployment. So we were already chopped over with the 26th MU, getting ready to deploy. Our scheduled date to leave was I think it was the 20th was our scheduled date, and that's the actual date that we left.
Of September?
Of September, yes. So when September 11th happened, I actually was, I was on before a deployment like that, they give you the opportunity to take a large chunk of leave, usually like 10 days. And I was actually on one of those blocks of leave preparing to go away for 6 months. And so, we were ready to go, but not quite, because I was aircraft, so aircraft have to be able to fly in order to fly, and so we had a few that were still broken down in repairs, because we thought we had another 9 days before we had to leave. And so there was a big push when that happened. Everything ramped up to get everything together so that we could leave. And of course, we had everything ready to go within another day, but they ultimately decided to not have us leave until the 20th.
When you say that block of time, was that like you were visiting your family?
Yes, yeah. I used mine and came back to Tennessee and visited my parents.
Okay, so you had your block of leave, knowing you were going to be deployed at that point then,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, well, going up to it, we were just going to be going to the Mediterranean for 6 months, and the schedule was going to be a pretty nice, different ports and nice places to go, and there was people already scheduling different activities at the different ports, because it's military, everything's laid out. There's a big plan to everything, and then whenever the 9/11 happened, it all changed, and so we didn't shoot straight across to Afghanistan. We had to stop. You always have to stop a few places resupplying different things, but we stopped on our way, went through the Suez Canal, and then went in Afghanistan.
So had your 10-day block started prior to 9/11 actually happening? Were you home when it happened?
No, it was actually towards the end of it. I actually had come back to North Carolina like the night prior, and I woke up to the news that had happened. The phone rang. You know, I'm sure everybody has that. You know, has their own story on how that news got to them. But I'd actually spent a few, you know, however many days back in Tennessee, and I had gone back to North Carolina in preparations to, you know, going back into my unit and coming off of leave.
What was your reaction when you saw the news or heard the news, got the phone call?
My initial was to call in and see what was going on, and that's actually when they sort of did recall people, bring us back in, because it was an all hands effort to get everything together. It's not like we were unprepared, but they still had aircraft that weren't ready to fly yet. They had another couple of days, and so it was an all hands effort to get everything together to where they could fly it off the coast onto the ship to take it across seas.
What prompted you to want to go the route of being a helicopter mechanic, and what is day-to-day you know, look like?
Well, what prompted me was I remember having a conversation with my father, and he said, you know, people always need to eat if you know, for a job, so you could be a cook or in, you know, a restaurant, and I don't want to do that for a living. And then people always got to move around and travel, and so whenever I was enlisting, one of the options was a aircraft mechanic. It was a general aircraft mechanic choice, and I chose, you know, I signed up for that. And then, you know, they told me where to go. They told me I was going to work on a helicopter. They told me which helicopter I would work on, and then they told me which systems of the helicopter. Helicopters fly, and if they break down, they crash and people die. So it's very important that the people working on them know what they're doing. So instead of, in the civilian world, one guy or gal works on every part of the aircraft. They get it's called an A&P license. Airframes and power plants. Airframes is everything else, power plants is the engine. One person can work on everything. At least in the Marine Corps, I can't speak for other branches, one person works on one specific portion of those licenses. So my portion was, I worked on the structural portion of the helicopter and the hydraulics and the brakes and the wheels. There was another group that did the electronics, and then there was another group that did the power plant, the engines, and then they did some of the more the heavier lifting of removing, like the actual, they would pull the engines and they would pull the transmissions. But we would do, you know, we would, you know, remove and replace our hydraulic components, but they specialized us. And so that's your life as a helicopter mechanic or an aircraft mechanic in the military. It's very specialized because, you know, car breakdown, you coast over to the side of the road and you call someone. Helicopter or aircraft breakdown, people die. And so it's they take it very seriously.
And I feel like with the nature of, you know, the topography, landscape of Afghanistan, it makes me think that helicopters were probably used more in that war than, you know, a number of others. Is that
well,
right?
helicopters are used heavily in most every activity, because you know, to bring people in, bring people out. You speak of the landscape over there being a desert. They had to fly high. Sometimes they had to fly low. They would get pop shots quite often. You know, out of the middle of nowhere, you'd be flying through the desert, and you'd look. I mean, nothing, and you just randomly, especially at night, you'd see little campfires. Just, you know, gosh knows how many miles between them, but you'd see them dotted because, you know, it's completely black out there. There's no electric lights giving off anything, so you'd see little campfires, and that's, you know, that's people living there in the middle of nowhere. Or you might see a little mud hut in the middle of nowhere, or camels hitched to a post in the middle of nowhere, and there's nobody around that you can see. I have no clue, but you speak for the helicopter. It's a very harsh environment because of the sand. every engine has to breathe. Air goes in, air goes out, and that air that comes in needs to be clean. And the sand out there is a very powdery sand. And so whenever you would land, all that sand would kick up, and that sand would get sucked in through the engine. And so there's actual systems in place to separate. It's called air separation system, and it separates that sand out so that the engine breathes clean air. But what it also does is it restricts the view of the pilot and the crew in the back that are helping guide them down, because pilot can't see everything. So there's a guy, or there's actually two guys or gals out both sides looking and telling them how high they are off the ground as they're going to land, and they couldn't see anything because it was so dusty. And I had one of the I wasn't in the air crew, but I had one of the air crews actually tell me one time, he says every landing is like a controlled crash. It's just a guess of where the ground is, and then so a lot of rough landings.
And I feel like when I think of helicopters, I think of the Black Hawk type and the ones that transport a lot of people. Is that really the most common type that's used, or are there many different types of helicopters?
There's quite a few different types. The type I was on was the CH-46 Echo, which was the dual rotor on the top. And in fact, it's been retired now. It was replaced with the Osprey. And it, at least for my purposes, that was a go-to helicopter, because there was the majority of them. And in the Marine Corps, it was a MEU, and in that MEU, my numbers may be a little off here, but there was 12 46s, the ones I worked on, 6-ish, I would think, of the Hueys, which is what you remember seeing in your Vietnam movies, the little Hueys, and then they had Cobras, which was our attack helicopters. And then we had the CH-53s, which was a heavy lift, single rotary helicopter. But there were 12 of the 46s and then the smaller numbers of the others. So the 46s, of course, just by pure numbers, there was a lot more of them up and doing things just because there's more of them. But as in for general all-purpose, what's the most common? I don't know.
What, I'm sure you have a lot, but what is your most vivid memory during active duty?
There was the first time we were attacked in Afghanistan. It was at night. We hadn't gone to sleep yet, and I was laying there talking to my buddy, talking about what we're going to do when we get home. That's what everyone always talks about. What are you going to do when you get home? And it was a big explosion, kaboom. And I remember his eyes, and I'm sure mine did the same, went real big, And of course we both jumped up and went and did what we had to do. But, that explosion and that look on his face, and I'm sure I had the same look on my face of, here we go. So I think of that memory fondly, because I have not seen that buddy in a long time. But yeah, anyway.
Do you keep in touch with much of the brotherhood?
Well, with modern technology, I'm friends with a lot of them on Facebook. I don't talk to them, any of them on a regular basis. The last one I spoke with in person was almost 8 years ago. Through Facebook, he was moving to Alaska. He was in Kentucky at the time, and I was living in Georgia at the time. And he was selling a lawnmower and a good price, and I thought, what, it's worth the trip to go see him and to get a lawnmower. And so my wife and I made the trip up, and we spent the evening up there and visited with him. And that was the last time I've actually seen one of them face to face. But we follow each other on Facebook.
What kind of feelings come up for you when you think of the legacy that you're part of, when you think of yourself as a veteran?
Legacies are, I don't know. I don't know if I've really, a legacy. Who knows what the history books will say about what we did over there? We were just a bunch of guys and just going and doing what we had to do. Everyone, you just do what you do. It's very simplistic to say that, but it is. You just, whatever, you take each day one at a time, and I don't, you know, will history remember me? No. Will history remember what we did there? Probably not, you know, but it is what it is.
How do you feel like your military experience has helped you since
My military experience has paid dividends. Every job I have gotten since I've been out, I have been told directly, was because I was a veteran. And that veteran status has done me well. It's helped me get, like I said, every job I've gotten since I got out. And that's, you know, that if I was to give the advice to any person coming out of high school, I would suggest some form of it, whether it's reserves, active duty, something. Because right now, at least in our society, at the current moment, people appreciate veterans, and it has helped. It's helped with that. You know, the very first job I got out of college, that the principal told me, he said, the only reason I hired you, I don't like hiring new teachers. The only reason I hired you is because you're a veteran, and I feel that I should give back to our veterans. You know, so that's a pretty strong statement to tell someone who just got a job, you know, with them. So yeah, that's my big takeaway. It has highly affected my life.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, no.
What, just as we wrap up, what does Veterans Day mean to you? You know, Veterans Day is just a day to be thankful to the people who are currently in and who have in the past signed that check of the cost of their life to give away to our country for our freedom. And, you know, to tell people who have done it, thank you, and to tell the people who are currently doing it, thank you. That's what Veterans Day is for.